to both of us is let's each find an example of something that from a pace, because we're working on pacing, from a pacing perspective worked well, and then from a pacing perspective you might have changed. Do you think that there is a connection, and this is sort of like an abstract 5 steps away kind of question I'm about to ask, but do you think that in some way that instructions around what I want you to do in creating a thesis, more clear instructions that you're saying you would do differently, is related to pacing?
Yeah, and I can pin that to exactly one part.
So let's go there.
That I thought was poorly paced was the wrap-up discussion, which is kind of the most important part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that I thought was really, A, there just wasn't enough time for it, but B, I think the lack of specificity, like about what we were producing and how we were going to then assess the quality of what was produced, that was where the pacing fell apart a little bit, because it was a little too open-ended, and it's like, okay, that would work as a discussion, like if we were doing a seminar kind of style thing. But that's actually something that functions a little differently from what we were trying to get out of this.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a really specific thesis that demonstrates an understanding of, you know, how the objectives and the techniques either change or stay the same over time.
Right.
So
you were hoping, so just for my own clarity, just to make sure I understand, that, so you sent the kids off to work in thought partners, whatever you want to call it, and you gave them, what was it, like 15, 20 minutes?
It was about 25 minutes.
Something like that?
Yeah. A little bit less maybe.
Okay, and then let's all come back together again. I think you're right. I think there was maybe like 7, something like that, minutes left in class, or something along those lines.
Yeah, not enough.
Yeah. So we can talk about that another time. Also, that's a literal definition of pacing that we could. But right. So, but putting aside how much time there was, the discussion didn't happen the way you hoped it would. The energy level wasn't there. That's my own spin on that.
No, I think that's fair.
Yeah. So some of the energy that you saw in the earlier discussion, for example, around the uncle,
lost that.
That was like you had the kids up and down and moving around. And I think those are like some of the great examples of pacing that was working well. And here I think that they were a little flatter in terms of their responses around the deeper dive exercise you'd had them do. And so part of the diagnosis is that there was a lack of clarity, and more to the point, a lack of time spent on instructing the kids on specifically what they needed to do. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So what would it have looked like if the kids had, if you'd come back and let's say there was only 7 minutes left, fine, whatever, but what would those 7 minutes have looked like?
Sure. So, I mean, if there was that short amount of time at the end of a 70-minute block right after lunch, then okay. So I think what we would do is do full class work, have one group who's feeling especially brave, volunteer their thesis, put it up on the board along with the rubric, and then as a class assess, okay, what do we think about this thesis? Is this a strong thesis statement? Does it address both parts of the question? And have them basically grade it as a class.
So they'd write it on the board?
Yeah, and maybe take 2 minutes. Okay, everyone has a copy of the rubric in front of you. I want you to grade it based on these 4 criteria or whatever, and then pick one. I'm going to give you 1 minute to choose one and write a justification for your grade. And it has to be evidence-based. So where in the thesis are you pinning this to? Okay. And I could also parcel that out too, right? Okay, so you 3 are going to take, justify the way you graded point 1, justify the way you graded point 2, so on and so forth. So that could be another way to do it. So then we would share that criteria, and then we can talk through, agree or disagree and why.
So that's a great exercise. Go ahead, sorry, I cut you off.
And I think that would be it.
Got it. So what's interesting about your diagnosis in terms of what that would have looked like, or
oh, sorry. Can I add one piece to that?
Sure.
So I think, I don't know if we could do this in 7 minutes, but based on the feedback, so as students talk, I would be creating a list of feedback on the side, and I think as a final piece, like a final exit ticket or whatever, based on the feedback that we've provided for this thesis, rewrite it.
So rewrite it.
Implement this feedback into a kind of draft 2.
If you were then seeing it through their eyes, how would you have written it differently?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So that's a great exercise, and I want to come back to it in a second.
Sure.
What's interesting? It's great. No, and I think there's a lot to work with there, and that's a great idea. The question I guess that I have, or wondering that I have, so it seems like the diagnosis of what had fallen flat for the kids there was the exercise that you had them do at the very end in the last 7 minutes versus where we had originally started, which was that the kids didn't necessarily know what they needed to do to begin with when they started.
Yeah, so I think framing around what are you going to produce at the end of this, and like why are we doing this?
So the instructions for the last 5 minutes would have come 25 minutes earlier.
That would be the framing. Yeah. So like, look, so we're doing this for two reasons. One of them is to better understand the story before we start diving into the project. But one of the key components for this is, you're going to be writing a thesis about this stuff, and what we're going to do today is look at 3 different examples of propaganda, and I want you to tell me if the techniques in this propaganda changed or stayed the same in one sentence. So, and then walk them through, like, okay, in order to do that, you're going to have to, and then talk them through the activities. So you're going to have to understand these 3 campaigns that they launched.
Right.
And you're also going to have to notice a bunch of techniques in each of your posters.
Right. So they know how to, so I just want to make sure they know how to do that. They know how to, and that's based on...
So the noticing the techniques in the posters, that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
So that was the first part of class.
Yeah, that's the Uncle Sam part.
In the Uncle Sam poster, what techniques make this poster work? Right? What techniques help it get its message across? So what we had created was a list of all the different techniques in that, and there's quite a few. So, for example, color scheme. Okay, red, white, and blue color scheme contributes to the message by suggesting that recruit or enlistment, voluntary enlistment, is patriotic. Okay. Another technique, the role of perspective. This was one thing that we got into pretty heavily, right?
They loved that. That was a brilliant idea.
So the decision
around the Mona Lisa move.
Yeah. So the decision to have the eyes and the finger pointing straight out at the viewer contributes to the message by putting the viewer on the spot. You could also link that to the fact that the word "you" is both in a different color scheme and bigger than all the other words. Okay. And by the way, that's 2 separate things.
It is.
Right?
And who was coming up with those ideas? Do you remember during class? All those things you just said?
It was, from what I remember, so we went around the room. I got one technique from each.
Yeah.
I forget if they were doing it in partners. I think they were. So, or maybe as individuals. Anyway, whatever the unit was in that, individuals or partners, we had one from each group. So we had a master list, and the follow-up question, I think, from what I remember, was like, which of these techniques contributes the most to the message?
Something along those lines,
And then that opened up some really interesting debate about that. And then we also got into like, what's the difference between propaganda and advertising, which is a really interesting question.
That was one of the things we talked about before in the lesson prep. Is exactly with you. Yeah, were you just parenthetically 5 seconds happy with how that ended up? You tied that up, or would you?
No, it wasn't satisfying. They wanted more, and I wanted to move on.
I know. So that's a tough one. Well, and that is a pacing question, no doubt. Is like when do you make a decision to give a little more discussion airtime to something that may not be, but you know what? There may be a payoff at the end. We'll get some buy. That's a different discussion. So let's return to this. Yeah. So, but getting back to the conclusions that you had just articulated, was like making the connections between red, white, and blue color scheme, the goal of the poster. Recruit for the army and patriot. That this is a patriotic act. Who do you remember who came up with those connections? Was that?
So from what I remember, I don't have any super conclusive. I know it was this person, but from what I remember.
No, sorry. It was the kids. Yeah. Sorry. Sorry. I'm not asking a quick question at all. It was the kids. Yeah. These are super sophisticated. They're into it. They're up and down, moving around. And so what worked? Let's just talk about that for a minute, and then we'll come back to the last exercise. What was working about that pacing?
Okay. So for the discussion of the poster, there were a few things. One of them, I think, was selecting something that they were all familiar with. So they'd all seen some version. They all knew who Uncle Sam was, which is interesting because his name is actually not on the poster.
That's true. Yeah.
Anyway, so it was a familiar piece that they were learning a new aspect of. So that was a part of it. learning how something, that there's another side to something familiar,
Mhm.
and that side is maybe a little more complicated or sinister than you
Mhm.
might realize. I
Mhm.
think it's like, okay, that's the activator bit.
Yeah, there's a puzzle,
but then,
it's something that you see every day. I think
Yeah.
that's always exciting.
but
Yeah.
one thing that I really enjoyed about that discussion was that there was an arc to it where at the start, it's okay, let's all go around and list one thing that we see.
Mhm.
That was kind of dutiful, like, I see the color schemes,
Yeah, we have to think about
Okay.
that because that rarely works. It's important to do, but it
Yeah.
really can be sloggy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it was, you know, all right, so we're going to build a list and everyone's
Yeah.
going to name one thing.
Right.
So the excitement then built with the follow-up. So what's the most effective